Good evening, everyone. I directly adjunct on the Jewish Studies program at the college. It really is a treat to see so many friends, students, community members here tonight. It's a special occasion anytime our community comes together for events such as these. But tonight there's cause for additional celebration as we mark the 36th iteration in the 18th year of the Three Rabbi panel. We also join the celebration of two great friends to the Jewish Studies program, Charlotte Parrish and the late Stanley Parrish. To say a few words of welcome and to honor the Parrish family, it's my pleasure to introduce Jewish Studies Advisory Board Chair, very dear friend, Anita Zucker. Anita and her family have been front and center in education and Jewish education. Anita spent a lot of her years in front of the classroom as a teacher, and that history remains a huge part of the Zucker family plan. It's an honor to introduce Anita Zucker.
Thank you, Marty, and thank you all for being here on this very cold evening. But the room is filled with warmth, and to me that makes it so special. And it's so special to look out and see all of your smiling faces. I'm thrilled to be with you this evening as the chair of the Jewish Studies Program Advisory Board and also as a vocal advocate of Jewish education, which our esteemed Rabbi will discuss shortly. And again, any of you that know me know that I'm very passionate about all education, because education is a key that unlocks doors for people, for any people. So to me, it is critically important that we make certain that we provide the best education, religiously as well as secularly, to all of the people of our community. It's so important. We're also here for another important reason. We're here to celebrate a family and a couple, Charlotte and the late Stanley Parrish, who for decades have been devoted members and leaders of Charleston's Jewish community, and have most recently endowed the Stanley and Charlotte Parrish Family Fund, which will support Jewish Studies community programming in perpetuity. A lifelong Charlestonian, Stanley, of blessed memory, operated a successful dental practice for nearly 50 years. He loved the Jewish intellectual landscape, and I imagine would have been engaged in tonight's discussion. An avid reader, he loved ideas and always approached them with the sensibility of a practical man with grounded sensibility. Stanley served as president of the Charleston Cancer Society, was the youngest founding member of Synagogue Emmanuel in 1946, and was a founding member and for many years the only life member of the Yosef Arnold Jewish Studies Program Advisory Board. Charlotte Marks Parrish, originally of Greensboro, married Stanley in 1945 and went on to be a leader of a variety of Charleston's Jewish organizations. I was one of those lucky women because I got to serve in sisterhood at Synagogue Emmanuel with Charlotte. It's been great, Charlotte. Charlotte served as a judge on the community baked in. She was president of the Southern branch of the Women's League for Conservative Judaism, and was the first female vice president of the Charleston Jewish Federation, among many other accomplishments. Following Stanley's passing in 2012, Charlotte has continued the Parrish legacy of supporting and promoting Jewish causes, and in particular Jewish education, which Stanley and Charlotte believe fervently to be the best means of self-betterment and the continuation of the Jewish people. Tonight is the 36th iteration of the biannual Three Rabbi panel, as you heard Marty say, so this is the 18th year, a very special year, a year that means high life, and life does continue. To have reached this special occasion has required a significant amount of effort from our community's various rabbis throughout the years, as well as from the staff and the leadership of the Yosef Arnold Jewish Studies program at the College of Charleston. I've always thought that Charleston was a special Jewish community, cohesive, welcoming, proud of its long and important history, but focused on its future, not inwardly focused, but very involved in the larger Charleston world of culture and philanthropy. The three-rabbi panel happened here because the community was eager to address the variety that constitutes American Jewish life, but to address that difference as an opportunity to show that difference is altogether compatible with civility and unity. Charlotte and Stanley, of blessed memory, are pillars of this community. They exemplify what makes Charleston such a special place. I'm deeply thankful, Charlotte, to you, to Stanley, and to your family for that. Just as the Jewish Studies program was given life by this community so many years ago, so too will the Stanley and Charlotte Parish Family Fund breathe new life into the Jewish Studies community offerings. Exposure to Jewish ideas, history, and culture is a priceless gift. Whether that exposure occurs as a child, a college student, or as an adult, the Parish Family Fund will allow Charlestonians access to Jewish enrichment for many, many years to come. To show our deep appreciation to a matriarch of our Jewish community, please join me in a round of applause for Charlotte Parish and Charleston.
My father derived much pleasure from his association with Marty, and he derived intellectual stimulation from his association with Marty and from his association with the Jewish Studies program. He took huge pride in being one of the first members of the board and being the first life member. My mother has also enjoyed to the fullest her association with the Jewish Studies community. Our family feels very privileged to be able to give back to the program that has given us so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. Thank you the entire Parish family for this really transformative gift. I really have long admired Charlotte and Stanley's passion for and dedication to this community, as well as the many incredible traits they brought to endeavors, both secular and Jewish. Their receptivity, their honesty, their kindness, their deep, deep integrity, and their passion for Jewish education. I might add, by the way, that we created the life membership at the Jewish Studies Advisory Board on a standing, because he was such a deeply committed member of the community. I'm incredibly grateful for their friendship and now for endowing the Parish Family Fund to support the Jewish Studies community program initiative. I'll be brief in my update on the Jewish Studies program. Suffice it to say that we're in the midst of one of our busiest semesters ever. At no point in the program's history, at least my memory of it, which is failing, have we had a bigger impact. Our efforts include academic courses, a major, a minor, JSU Hillel programming, Jewish student recruitment, and of course a variety of community programs. My job has been especially thrilling of late, as each of these components, in large part, function successfully with so many able hands. It's been my pleasure to watch the program grow, and now to see it succeed with such help from the staff and faculty. I'd like to really acknowledge special Ian Eilerson, our administrator, who's sitting in the back. And Mark Swick, our community liaison, and I guess photographer, who's standing up. construction of our kosher, vegan, vegetarian dining hall is moving ahead, finally on schedule. And we're nearly out of the ground. We intend for that facility to be complete by November of this year, November 2015, with a full opening in January of 2016, the beginning of the spring semester. True to our wishes, and with some pride, actually, truth is, with a lot of pride, and Anita's pushing, the dining hall will be very much open to the entire Jewish community and the community at large, with a la carte options available to kosher eaters, vegetarian eaters, vegan eaters, and all the rest of us who might need a vegetarian meal. Town and gown, community and student are both constituencies of Jewish studies, so the new dining facility will be a reflection of that reality, and in a way, an important opportunity to yet improve on that reality. Now to this evening's program. At the root of what Jewish Studies program is about, the essence of all our component parts is Jewish learning and Jewish education. And that's what we've come together this evening to hear about. Now, you might not think that Jewish education is a particularly contentious topic, although Jews can contend about anything. I expect that our rabbis all agree that providing a Jewish education is of great importance. But what is Jewish education? When, where, and how of that equation is much more complex, and will be at the center of the discussion tonight. A special note of thanks to our rabbis. They follow in a wonderful tradition of Charleston community rabbis interested in Klal Yisrael, in the greater Jewish collective. And I'm deeply, deeply thankful for that commitment. We're all beneficiaries of that, and I'd like to give them each a round of applause. The rabbis will each have 12 minutes to reflect on the views of their respective denominations towards Jewish education, as well as the approaches of their congregations. We do our best to change the order of presentation from one panel to the next. For this evening, we will begin with Rabbi Stephanie Alexander of Kahal Kadosh Beth Elohim, representing the Reform movement, followed by Rabbi Adam Rosenbaum of Synagogue Emmanuel of the Conservative movement, and we will finish with Rabbi Michael Davies of Congregation Georgia of the Orthodox movement, sort of from left to right. Those who are familiar with their traditions might understand that. After this evening, we'll each understand it. Following the rabbi's remark, we'll move on to questions. And I expect you all have some, so let's begin. Afterwards, I hope that you all stick around for a brief reception in celebration of the Karish family and their gift to Jewish studies. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Alexander, Rosenbaum, and Davies. And I introduce Rabbi Stephanie Alexander.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you once again for the invitation. Thank you all for being here on an exceptionally cold evening. And a particular thank you to our colleagues who are not a part of the panel this evening. I know Rabbi Davis is in the back there, and we thank him for being here. And Rabbi Turkle, for those who have not yet met him, will have the chance to hear him on this panel in the fall, and we welcome him as well. I want to take us from this cold night in the midst of winter to springtime and Passover. Because the Passover Seder is the archetype for Jewish education. And what we are charged to do in the Seder is really our task in all educational efforts: storytelling. Our job is to tell our story in such a way that all learners of all ages and all backgrounds move beyond learning about Judaism as an outside observer, and like a participant in the Seder who feels him or herself to personally go free from Egypt, take up residence within the story, make it one's own. Thus it is important for all education to begin where the Seder begins. Not with the story itself, but with 4 children, representing at least 4 different styles, 4 different moods. The Seder begins by seeking to understand its learners before ever getting to the heart of what there is to learn. And as with the telling of the Passover story, so too with Jewish storytelling, all Jewish education. One size does not fit all. I believe I am consistent with my movement's philosophy in saying there is no such thing as the ideal method for Jewish education. Only the ideal outcome. Jewishly knowledgeable individuals with strong and proud Jewish identities. A case in point. My husband attended a day school for 7 years. I attended our neighborhood public schools. I was deeply involved in our congregation's youth group. His congregation didn't have a youth group at the time, but he spent his summers at Jewish camp where I was far too homesick of a child ever to venture. Admittedly, his Hebrew skills were stronger than mine. I had more experience with advocacy and bringing Jewish values to diverse and pluralistic settings. We both have strong ties to Israel. We're both committed to having a Jewish home, raising a Jewish family, and yes, we both happen to become rabbis. None of this is in spite of one form of education over another, but each as the direct result of our individual journeys. Jewish education comes in all shapes and sizes, formal and informal, immersive and supplemental, peer-based and intergenerational. There are programs with deep ties to communal organizations grounded in a particular movement, and those that strive to serve a wide band of the community and transcend denominational labels. There are day schools, supplemental schools, and boarding schools, day camps, and sleepaway camps, youth groups and leadership academies, any number of conferences, missions, and trips, to say nothing of the educational value of simply reading and discussing Jewish books, film, literature, and cultural expressions of all kinds. Regardless of structure, it's content that matters. In order to nurture proud and strongly identified Jews, Jewish education needs to cover 3 key content areas, and we talk about these in our own religious school at KK. They're what I call Jewish cultural literacy, Jewish competency, and Jewish values, ethics, and outlook. Jewish cultural literacy means that when people make reference to a Torah story or Jewish holiday, a life cycle passage or important event in Jewish history, it doesn't make you shrink from engaging in the conversation for fear that they know something you don't. It also means that you get why bagels and cream cheese are Jewish and corned beef on white bread with mayo just isn't. That we rise when we hear Hatikvah, and that we can sing, if not the whole soundtrack to Fiddler on the Roof, at least a song or two. Jewish cultural literacy is that base of Jewish knowledge that loosely translates to Jewish street cred. The second level, Jewish competency, refers to the skills we learn through hands-on practice. Wearing talits and tefillin, blowing the shofar, benching Birkat Hamazon. There are also the rituals that as Reformed Jews, we can only really evaluate and adapt for our own meaning and spirituality if we had the chance to try them on for science. And the last level, Jewish values, ethics, and outlook, is perhaps the most self-evident. Yet it's also something that can never be fully cultivated in any school or program, no matter how consuming or immersive that experience may be. It therefore points to perhaps the most fundamental observation true of all Jewish education. The most important Jewish educators in a child's life will always be his or her parents. And so to the extent that there is any ideal format for Jewish education, it is that which parents determine for themselves most ideally complements what they're trying to teach at home. An educational setting that both supports and extends their own family's values, and one that supplements and provides educational experiences that parents can't create at home, because that's vitally important non-Jewish settings. And the fact that that post was shared more widely and broadly than anything I had written before or since, by far, suggests to me that that idea strikes a chord. This is what I wrote. Every year I forget when announcements about the grade level holiday program come home with instructions to dress in red and green. When the walk to school reveals a Christmas tree framed in the school's office window. When I find myself asking, why can't they just stick with reading, writing, and arithmetic and leave the holidays out of it? I forget that this is in fact precisely the course in which we had decided it was important as a family to enroll. How to be a proud Jew in a predominantly non-Jewish world. Every year I begin to point accusing fingers at teachers, administrators, and room parents. And I forget that it's not they, but we, my husband and I, who are the most important educators for our child at that moment. I don't need his school to teach him about Hanukkah. His family and synagogue are doing a good job of that. I don't particularly care if they teach him about Christmas. The holiday is omnipresent in America, and he should understand what it's about, simply as a form, again, of cultural literacy. I defer to my husband to do the annual Hanukkah show and tell. I respect that it means a lot to our son, and that he should have a chance to share some of his holiday with his classmates, so we make it happen. But to be honest, it's not my thing, and I would just as soon invite them over to our house for a Hanukkah party instead, if I could wrap my head around the combination of sizzling oil and rambunctious first graders all throughout my home. So rather, my lesson plans for the holiday season look like this. When he comes home from school, feeling frustrated and left out because his head is filled with Christmas songs that have no meaning for him, we ask him, what does this feel like, to be the other? Who else might feel this way, not just during the winter holidays, but at all times throughout the year? What can we do to reach out to those individuals and help them feel included? This is our opening to teach the Jewish value of empathy. When he becomes grumpy at the sight of a Christmas tree, not just in his school, but everywhere, we take him to a friend's house who has a beautiful Christmas tree, adorned with ornaments collected over the years, each one the prompt for a story or memory. And we discover that what might be out of place for us would be tremendously meaningful for others in the proper context. This is our opening to teach the Jewish value of respect. When he struggles to decide whether or not to participate in this year's holiday program, we talk with him about what is making him feel like he wants to and what is making him feel like he doesn't. About what it would mean to him to choose to participate or not. About how it doesn't mean he's any less Jewish if he does sing Christmas songs, or that he's any less of a good classmate or friend if he doesn't. And that we support whatever he decides to do, whether it's the same as last year's decision or not. This is our opening to teach Jewish decision-making skills. The coursework in how to be a proud Jew in a predominantly non-Jewish world is challenging, but the curriculum is so very important. And just like every meaningful class, every year the teachers learn from their students as well. To leave those winter holidays and conclude with the Passover motif where I began. I love the language of one of the Haggadot on my shelf that calls the obligation of education, of storytelling, the duty to give memories. Whether those memories are cultivated through day school or public school, in a synagogue classroom or a bunk at camp, in a school cafeteria or around the dinner table at home. The important thing is that families are deeply involved in their creation, and that those memories are positive, inspiring, vibrant, and recalled with love and affection for years to come. Thank you.
Rabbi Rosenberg.
Everyone, good evening. I first of all want to give, of course, a big shout out to Charlotte, to Fern, and of course, remember Stanley tonight, to Chronoli Bracha. Charlotte and Stanley's deeds are only exceeded by their decency, and it's very appropriate for us to honor them this evening. And I certainly always value, Charlotte, the fact that I knew Merrill and Michael and Gail and Stuart way before I knew what a wonderful Jewish community Charleston, South Carolina was. It actually was probably before I even knew what Charleston, South Carolina was at all. So it's great to go way back, and it's great to be here this night. So I want to bring you back to an experience I had. I believe I was in 6th grade, and our school went to the symphony, and it was a specific educational program. All of these different schools converged on the Denver Symphony Orchestra, and they were trying to, of course, educate us on the very basics of the best of classical music. The conductor was speaking to the audience, and at one point said, okay, well, we're about to play snippets of 2 pieces, and the first piece was written by someone named Mozart. Can you all say that? You all say Mozart? And we all said Mozart. Like, okay, very, very good. So the second piece was written by someone, well, his name is Harder. And we all said Harder. We all think we know how to educate. Sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. And as Rabbi Alexander said so well, one size does not fit all. And that certainly is an approach of the conservative movement. And this dichotomy that we have between day school and religious school is a tension that is very much part of our movement. And in short, we really embrace both while recognizing the differences between them. So a couple of words about my family's particular decisions. So I was in day school growing up from K to 12. K to 6, I was in a school that was, I would say, liberal Zionist, if you will. And 7 to 12, I was at a school that was, I'd say, modern Orthodox-ish. It was hard to really say. It kind of depended. These were both community schools. And my wife, Ellen Miriam, she went to public school throughout. And so when it came time for us to decide what we would do with our kids, it wasn't something that we really talked about very much. We moved to Charleston, and here was this great school, Stone Hebrew Academy, willing to take our children in and nurture them. We are very happy to send our children to Stone Hebrew Academy. And at this very same time, I and everyone at our synagogue, I believe, is very proud of the synagogue school. We're very proud of the Sunday school that has really transformed, very much for the better, especially over these last couple of years. And it really is possible to have these 2 feelings at the same time. Conservative movement supports both day school and synagogue school education. If you look at the USCJ, United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism website regarding synagogue schools, you will discover that such after-school schools, not the best phrase I know, but you get the idea. The pillars of such schools include Jewish values, understanding these votes, basic Torah study, Hebrew language, prayer, Israel, and understanding the conservative movement. These are certainly values that are important to the Solomon Schechter day school system. Look at Solomon Schechter's day school website. You'll see the following paragraph Our students think like leaders rather than followers. They learn how to live as Jews. They take their studies, their heritage, and their world seriously. Know how to enjoy themselves while doing it. As alumni, they become part of a prestigious community of friends and scholars. And always, they understand the essential value of being a mensch. Sounds good. But let's break down for a moment some of these tensions. Before I get into that, I just want to note that when I say the word tensions, tensions don't necessarily mean problems. A tension means that there's always a bit of a struggle of some sort. There's always a bit of back and forth. That doesn't mean that it's a crisis. And certainly here in the conservative movement, we have embraced the tension and embraced it, I think, in the best way possible. Let's start with synagogue schools. Keep in mind that not all schools are created equal. Because I imagine that many of you, if not most of you, have memories. Any bitter? A few sweet, of their religious school days. I tell you, afternoon religious school or Sunday school, that is the time where even if you are the best behaved child in the world, that's where you goof off. I'll tell you this quick anecdote. Ella Miriam she follows rules. I mean, she really does. But at her religious school in Rochester, New York, she was the one changing the clock when the teacher wasn't looking and putting it 20 minutes fast so that they were let out of school. This is my wife, all right? This is not her common behavior, right? Religious schools, certainly of yore, would bring out that kind of approach sometimes. I believe that religious schools have changed, often for the better. The challenge we have with religious schools, certainly in our movement, is that when you put religious school among other extracurricular activities, sometimes it has to compete with other extracurricular activities, and sometimes it's very common for families to say, you know, we'll put that one a little bit lower. Because when you think about it, let's say your kids are in sports, let's say they're in theater. The soccer coach will say, hey, if they miss any practices, they don't get to play. If they miss any rehearsals, they're out of the show. Can you imagine doing that these days with religious school? If you miss a single session, no bar mitzvah for you. That message doesn't work, nor would we ever want to get to that point. So that's one of the perpetual challenges. So we have to make sure that our religious schools, our synagogue religious schools, are as inviting and as up-to-date as possible. It requires us to use technology well. It requires us to integrate with the synagogue community so that the children who attend religious school, they don't feel that they go in a bubble, that they just enter and exit the building and they never show up again. One of the things that our religious school has very consciously done over the last couple of years been arranging Hebrew lessons via Skype or FaceTime, and including the kids who are learning the prayers, having them go up with their high school mentors, and having them lead a prayer here and there. It brings more people into the synagogue community. It integrates them with the whole. That is at least a couple of ways that we at Synagogue Emmanuel try to make sure that we are including and making our religious school as strong as possible. Now, with day school education, it has to be said that on one level, comparing the two really is like apples and oranges. You can't make direct comparisons all the time, because when you talk about daily Hebrew and Judaic studies as opposed to once a week or a couple times a week after school, the two just don't compare. So it's important to keep that in mind when we are going back and forth. The advantages of day school that we see is First of all, oftentimes you have very small class sizes. You get terrific individual attention. And also, as I mentioned before, you don't have to compete with any other extracurricular activities. Your Judaic studies is part of your curriculum. It's built in. And then you can do your soccer and your theater, etc. The potential disadvantages of day schools can be the feeling that I certainly had in Jewish day school growing up, that I felt sheltered. And obviously, as with so many issues of our issues of modern Judaism, there's the issue of cost. These things don't happen for free. We know that. And it can be challenging to justify the cost and still remain a top-tier school. As such, I will note that it's not a secret that the Sullivan Schechter schools have begun to fade. It's still a quality product, but the numbers have gone down. They have gone down, and what we are finding is that community schools are becoming more the norm. Community Jewish day schools. And what's important to note is another tension that I want to describe that conservative Jewish families deal with is that for those who send their children to a community day school, it depends on what it means to be a community day school. Because you can do it in several different ways. A couple of ways that I note is you can say, well, we're a community day school, and the curriculum reflects the different denominations of the students herein. You can also be a community day school to say, we have our curriculum that bends toward a particular movement or particular philosophy, and we call ourselves a community day school simply because we need students from across the denominations to remain a viable school. Those are two very different approaches. It's not good, it's not bad, it's not anything like that, but it does make the experience for conservative Jews in such community day schools, it really makes it varied. The last point I want to mention does certainly reflect what Rabbi Alexander said. The note of no matter what we do, all of this starts at home. No matter what choice you make, whether it's day school or supplementary synagogue school, because we note, we believe firmly that Judaism is a way of life. It is not simply an academic discipline. Jewish education does not start when the kids are dropped off at their school. It does not start when they enter the car at the end of the session. So it is all up to all of us to continue to put joy into Jewish observance. And, I recognize this may be a little self-serving, but to ask our students to be more a part of our synagogue communities so that they can feel integrated and they can feel that their journeys are not simply in isolation. We need to do what is best for our children, regardless of whether it's day school, synagogue school, or a combination thereof, to do what is best for our children when it comes to fulfilling this essential mitzvah of Jewish education. Thank you.
Rabbi Davies?
Picture yourself as a student in a second grade classroom. I know when I was a student in a second grade classroom, I followed the lead of El Miriam. I was the student changing the clock in the back of the room. But this classroom's a little different than the one that I found myself in. It's Toronto, somewhere in the 1960s. The school day starts with everyone reciting the Lord's Prayer. And after that, singing of God Save the Queen. One day you walk into class, and the teacher says, "Class, legislation has just been passed in the government." As a second grader, you wonder, what does legislation mean? Is it some new flavor of ice cream? There was legislation passed that does not allow anything of a religious nature into the school system, the teacher explains. Therefore, we will no longer say the Lord's Prayer. And now, class, the teacher continues, please stand and sing God Save the Queen. So let me get this straight. We're not allowed to talk about God or pray to God, but whoever this God is, could he please finally save the Queen? You might wonder why I opened with such a story. I think the reason is because when we talk about Jewish education, we need to talk about education in general. Because when education veers from its true purpose, it becomes at best a vehicle for cramming information into the head of the student, or far worse, nothing more than indoctrination. High grades often hide the fact that 20% of the information crammed in right before an exam pops out as soon as you finish. 3 or 4 hours later, another 10%, and a day or two later, another 10% disappears. Looking back, you hardly remember any of it. I imagine most of us at some point in our young lives, whatever educational system we might have found ourselves, probably late at night when we're dozing after cramming for said exam, ask the following question. What am I doing here? Why am I studying? Who do I want to be in life? Why do I exist? And even if the cramming, let's say, does pay off, do high marks really indicate what kind of a person you are? Could I become a great doctor if I'm not a caring person? Could I become a brilliant lawyer if I'm not just and fair? Could I even become a decent human being if I've never been taught to deal with life's big issues, ideals, values, and ethics? As we are so busy memorizing vast quantities of knowledge, we know the least about the knower of knowledge, ourselves. The Hebrew word for education is chinuch, which comes from the word chen, and is often translated into English as grace, but that translation is not terribly helpful. When you meet a person with chen, you get a sense that there's something very attractive about them, but not on the outside. Chen means inner view. So what does chinuch mean? Chinuch means to draw out a person's inner beauty. A beauty that is a function of relationship, how well one relates to themselves, to their friends, to their community, to the world, and to the reality beyond all, which we call God, but that was last year's talk. Education essentially means the same thing, coming from the Latin word educare, which means to draw out. To draw out that which is fundamentally already there. Through education, one is actually meant to become aware of themselves, to absorb ideas, and draw out the inner you, bring you into the world of harmonious relationship. Because as you discover your own chen, your own inner beauty, you discover the chen of all people from the interrelatedness which we all share. And no civilization in history has so valued nor predicated its survival on study more than the Jewish people. We look back to the origins of the Jewish nation when Moses addresses the Jews right after the Exodus from Egypt. What would you say in such a situation as a leader of the people? Talk about liberty, perhaps their final destination, Maybe warn them of the journey that lies ahead. But what did Moshe teach them? He did none of those things. 3 times he states, when your child asks you in the future, this is what you should say. Rabbi Alexander referenced this because we talk about it often at the Passover Seder. Moses is thinking about the distant future and the duty of education. And this is why Jews became a people whose passion is education, whose heroes are teachers, and whose citadels are schools. When we talk about bringing this education to our children, the longest and largest study about religious development was done by a professor of sociology at the University of Notre Dame by the name of Christian Smith. Not Jewish. The question he asked was, what factors make for religious development? In other words, education is only worthwhile if it sticks. So how does it stick? The main finding in the study was that it has to be immersive. Because kids look at what people do, and they're very attuned to hypocrisy. So if you say one thing and do another, they'll catch it. When surrounded by people who are actively engaged, that makes it so much more for them to take in. Jewish education is not from a book. It's from life. It has to be lived, socially, educationally. Informal education too. Camps, youth programs, and our own congregations, of course. I want you to ask yourself, what did you see growing up? How much did you choose to embrace? And how much didn't you? It doesn't mean you have to embrace every single thing you are immersed in your life. But as much as you can, the more immersive, the more ultimately it sticks. When we talk about Jewish education, I feel we'd be remiss if we wouldn't mention the foundational piece of it, the Torah. To understand Torah, you cannot just read or study it like other books or subjects. You need to experience it. You need to immerse yourself in it. You need to live it. After all, the Torah is called the book of life. And there's this distinct difference between truth and life. Truth is information, life is experience. No one can transmit life to you by virtue of communicating information. You can study truth, but to experience and encounter life, you have to get involved. You have to immerse yourself. You have to taste it. I remember a few years back when I first heard about my wife, Ora. You can imagine maybe a dating site, reading a list, I was handed a piece of paper. Her name was actually spelled wrong on the paper. But there were some details, and I was reading the paper and I said, oh, okay, I'd like to meet this individual, but I don't know very much about her. Because someone can tell you everything you'd like to know about your significant other. But until you meet the person, you merely have some facts on a piece of paper. When you do meet, then there will be an exchange that you won't be able to capture in concepts or words. Torah is a living encounter. It's more than words on a page. It's an experience. It's an access to revelation. Because revelation didn't just happen 3,300 years ago at Mount Sinai. Torah is an ongoing revelation that every one of us can connect to. At the Passover Seder, Rabbi Alexander mentioned the 4 children. Argument can be made that for the last of the children, the one who is she'eno yodea lishal, does not know how to ask. What do? It says, apetach lo. Open their mouth, pull out the questions, have them be involved in the encounter, in the revelation. When you ask a question about the text, when you access critical thinking, when you put the interpretation together, when you become part of the learning process, something hits you. It's an aha moment, a flash of revelation. Now, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, but I think the risk is very, very worth it. The immersive nature of Jewish education is relegated not only to our schools and our congregations, to our formal and informal institutions, but first and foremost, within our homes. Something else that came from this study in Christian Smith, that teens actually do listen to their parents. Amazing, I know. Even if parents don't know it. They may not listen to what it is that you say, but they listen to what parents do. Not whether they went to religious school, had a religious family, but when they see their parents making a religious sacrifice. When you go to a class after a long day of work. When you attend services, even though it's cold outside and it's really early in the morning. When you use your vacation money to pay for Jewish day school. That's what makes an impact. I recall some impacts in my life. I am a regular attendee at daily services, morning and evening. And I'll tell you this, it's not because I'm a rabbi. I actually go to a different congregation for services. It's because I recall very fondly going to services with my father every day. And that was when I was in school, I went to services in school, day school. But outside of school, we still went. It was Sunday, we still went. Vacation, we still went. Immersive in its nature, and something that sticks with me and will stick with me for the rest of my life. When we welcome people into our home on Shabbat or at any other point in time, again, it's not because I'm a rabbi that I am so freely opening my door, but it's because my mother is such a gracious host. Because she welcomes people in. I was speaking to a friend only a few moments before coming up to the podium this evening, and he said he remembers a specific Shabbat spent with my family. It was everything he needed in the world at that point in time, because of the graciousness, the welcoming of guests. Many families give over in large measure the training of their children to synagogue, school, and after-school programs. But no matter how successful these programs may be, they can never be a substitute for Jewish home. When children see their parents study, they will grow up believing that Torah study is important for children as well as adults. When they observe their parents, and perhaps we should do this as an exercise, when they observe their parents being extra careful about their income taxes, they will learn to be ethical and honest in their business practices. And when everyday behavior modeled by their elders is giving and kind, they will learn true regard for the sensibilities of others. Instead of focusing only on a child's process, we must attend to the parent's process as well, to the adult's process. We ask not only how to change our children, but how to change ourselves. And this is a significant change in perspective, for sure, with the practical implication that lists of child-raising tricks become almost unnecessary. Individuals who have to transform themselves into good parents and teachers intuitively understand a lot more about how to raise children. Most of us are somewhere along that process, but everyone can use and can benefit from advice as to how to progress more efficiently. I want to conclude with one final point through a story. The story is about the former chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth, Lord Jonathan Sacks. Rabbi Sacks actually mentions, he credits much of his learning to Rabbi Nachum Rabinowitz, who was a rabbi here in Charleston, I believe the 50s. Rabbi Sacks says one time after a particularly cold winter, and I know it's cold here, but you can imagine winters in England, a little bit colder, a little more constant. After a cold winter, they decided, he and his wife, to take a trip to Eilat, in southern Israel, to relax, to get away with it. And during the course of this trip, they found themselves on one of those boats that have the glass bottom, where you can see the sea life in the waters around Eilat. And the captain of the ship overhears the couple speaking in English, and he says, "Atem me'Anglia? Are you from England?" Of course. Wonderful! I just spent holiday there. The grass, so green. The buildings, so old. The people, so nice. Then, with a vast smile on his face, he spreads out his arms to the round hills surrounding Elam, and he says, Aval zeh shalom. But this is ours. Education is important. Education is critical. Education is crucial. But if we don't focus at least as much, if not more, on our own rich tradition, we're really missing the boat. Let us remember, both for ourselves and for our children, to immerse ourselves in our Judaism, because Zeh Shalom, this is ours. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions. Maybe. Loud.
Herman Wood, the great novelist, wrote a book, not many people know about. It's called The World We Live On. This is our heritage. And he said he's very committed, almost 97. And he said that he thought the primary goal of diaspora Jews teach every child to read. Minimum. So I asked the rabbi.
Agreed. The facility with the Hebrew language is really important. I'm actually just preparing for a program we have at KKD tomorrow night, which uses some videos that have been put together of leading figures in our movement, rabbis, lay leaders, those who head some of our movement's main organizations, reflecting both on what each of them identifies as reform and what the biggest challenges to Reform Judaism are. In the latter segments, the fact that many in our movement are not comfortable reading Hebrew or are intimidated by the language, and how so much of our tradition cannot be conveyed outside of the original language. So when we study a text, we're only skimming the surface of what it actually means, and we can't dive down into the language itself. But that is indeed a challenge to the individuals of our movement and our movement as a whole. So there has certainly been an increased emphasis on Hebrew language in Reform Judaism.
At a seminar that I attended at the USCJ convention in 2013, Rabbi Adam Greenwald explained that teaching Hebrew, that Hebrew really is the keys to the kingdom. That if you speak Hebrew, then you feel more comfortable in Jewish settings, ritual settings. If you feel more comfortable in Jewish ritual settings, you're going to feel more comfortable around the people, with the other people around you. If you feel more comfortable, I mean, it's a domino effect. So indeed, but I think really that phrase, keys to the kingdom, for reading Hebrew, it's definitely at the core of our religious school and also at the core of my conversion curriculum.
Don't have much to add, although I would note a fantastic thing that I've noticed over the last several months, how many Hebrew courses are offered in the Charleston community. It's really unbelievable how much opportunity there is to follow this creed, to understand, to find those keys to the kingdom, and really take advantage of those who, there's a few people in the room who attend my Sunday evening Torah study class. I often talk about the fact that really there are things that are lost in translation, and we really have to go back to the original text in order to fully understand the depth of what the Torah is trying to teach us. It's sometimes you have a teacher that can help you with that, but also very, very important to try to be able to do that as well.
Everyone's in favor of Hebrew. Any other questions?
So knowing that a pluralistic society is really impacted by the relationships you have with other people and your knowledge of them, and your ability to be open towards them, to what extent does one type of Jewish education versus another inhibit or promote the possibility of positive pluralistic engagements with people of different faiths, backgrounds, and perspectives?
So the question has to do with pluralism and its relationship to Jewish education. Does Jewish education inhibit or enhance the acceptance of pluralism in other cultures? Well, we start on the other side, Rabbi Davies.
So, I think that when one realizes the depth of the Jewish education, how far we can go in understanding what is out there, we really understand that there's an appreciation for everything in the world, for every way of reaching spiritual heights, for every way of academic study. All of those things are incorporated really into what we believe in our Jewish faith. I think in terms of understanding how to interact with others and things of that nature, it's an important lesson to be taught in any educational context. And that means whether it's a Jewish day school, whether it's a Hebrew school, whether it's afternoon school, whatever it might be, public school, any context, that lesson, that value should be taught because it's crucial and so important for the world in which we live and to make it into a better place.
As I alluded to earlier, growing up in Jewish day school, I was very cognizant of the fear that I was maybe being a little, was sheltered perhaps a little too much. And I think that that is something that is easily combated. First of all, so we'll take the day school for a moment. Within day school, I mean, is day school promoting a tolerant attitude toward all people? Is it teaching that? And also, are your families teaching that? I mean, I have very warm memories of my parents inviting people of all different creeds, races, sexual orientation. They were all at our house for Shabbat dinner at different times and Seder's over the years. So that's one way where if you are going to go that route, there has to be special attention paid to that piece of it because that is indeed essential. If one is going to a religious school, to a synagogue religious school, I think it's also important to know because when students may ask, well, why do we bother learning about this? Aren't we being exclusionary by being in this particular endeavor? And it's important for the teachers to convey, while we have to learn about our customs, or we have to learn about our traditions, at the core of that is being a citizen of the world. So as long as that is conveyed, regardless of whether you're in synagogue school or day school, it's obviously a very important piece.
I don't think one format for Jewish education favors pluralistic outlook over others. I think every one of us needs to take that on as part of our mission, no matter what organization we're a part of. Some of us do it better than others. Actually, I would tip my hat at the moment, having learned something just walking in today about how Emmanuel's synagogue school visited the various congregations in the community over the course of one Sunday, comparing and contrasting and realizing that there's more to be compared than contrasted between all of the synagogues as they went. I think all of us, synagogue, day school, we can all learn from that model.
So in today's world, with so many people marrying outside of the religion, and so many kids growing up without a Jewish identity and not knowing which way to go, how would you say you target those kids to make sure they still get that family background that they don't necessarily get at home?
So the question is, lots of people seem to be without a Jewish identity. How do you sort of target that reality?
I think people are lucky. For the most part, people who are coming to us in a synagogue setting are doing so because they're seeking a Jewish identity for their families. So we already have a foot in the door when we meet a family, and then try and meet them where they're at. start from what they know, from where they feel comfortable, and simply add to. We also try, we can always do better, but we try and explicitly say thank you to non-Jewish spouses who are supportive of Jewish educations for their children and fostering that learning at home as well. We generally do that around life cycle moments because we have the opportunity to do it. When somebody is welcoming a baby into the Jewish people, when they're receiving Torah, bar mitzvah, we have a chance to turn to that non-Jewish parent and acknowledge the gift they're giving to the Jewish people as well as to their children and say thank you for that. We can build on that even more. And through Intro to Judaism classes and other opportunities that make sure that adults can be learning alongside, either with or parallel to their kids, we recognize that not everyone has the skills to be able to be ideal Jewish educators at home, but if they have a love for their family and a growing love for Judaism, then they really have all they need for us to be able to help and build upon that.
Not much to add to that, but I would simply say that open-mindedness is really the key and it's a reality that I think that conservative synagogue schools have had to deal with a little more often because of the changing intermarriage rates and the growing number of intermarried families who have found a home in conservative synagogues. To note that we offer the very best of our traditions to anyone who walks in the door, and to recognize that, all right, everybody's coming in from a different background, from a different understanding of Judaism prior to walking in the building, and so it's the idea of being unassuming and open-minded that's going to be able to carry the day.
I once saw a depiction of a congregation's entryway, and each of the doors of the synagogue was decorated with a different access point to get into that building. So there was one door that was decorated with a program, and one door that was decorated with linking the generations, and one that was decorated with services. Each one had a different way of accessing and getting into the door. And I think what we have to do is open those doors as wide open as we possibly can to allow for whoever is interested in seeking to be able to come in and see what we have to offer.
With the importance of the child seeing what's going on in the home, do you view it as a mistake to send your child away to a Jewish school, to a Jewish high school at that point in time? When it's very important, the teens are a very important time. And I just like a yes or no answer.
So the question is, given everyone's emphasis on the importance of education in the home, would it be a mistake to send one's child away to a Jewish high school to get further formal education?
Yes or no?
No.
Will you accept a not necessarily?
The question was longer than the answer.
Seriously, I'd like to hear,
A little more, okay.
Rabbi Davies, I think this is probably directed perhaps more at you because. Okay, you have a chance to.
I mean, simply just to note that, again, one size does not fit all. And different kids need different things at different points in their lives. And I know that sounds really vague, but I think it's very much true. I mean, you have, 4 children, right, Nathan?
how many?
How many children do you have? 3, okay, my bad. Sorry. I have 3 children as well. Already I can tell of the remarkable differences between all of them, and they're still pretty little. So, I think that's what we have to keep in mind, that people are gonna need different things, and, so, again, not necessarily.
One of the things that I mentioned before that came out of the study about adolescents and their growth and what they notice about their family life and their parents is what their parents sacrifice. And I think when one makes the decision to send their child away for 4 years because showing them that they value the Jewish education that they're sending them to, that makes a huge impression on the child. I agree with Rabbi Rosenbaum that I do not think it's for everyone, but when one makes that decision, I don't know that there's anything comparable in terms of what impression that makes on the child, recognizing the amount of value that the parents are placing on what it is that this child is doing now, being separated from the parents, being away from home. That message is coming through the whole time. So I think that that's something that is very important to take into account.
Okay. One last question, Sarah.
Sometimes formal Jewish education, such as a Jewish day school or sending a child away to a yeshiva or a school that is far away from home, isn't always a possibility logistically. Are there forms of informal Jewish education other than the parents that you could name or give a little bit more information about?
So the question is alternatives to sending people away for formal education, to people who are unable to send kids away for formal education in high school.
There are many of which you are intimately knowledgeable. And none of them would I set up as being on a tier different than residential high school. I mean, to go back to my original point, no one size fits all. There is no ideal. It's wonderful that we have the plurality of choices that we have in Jewish education, all the different modalities we can access. I grew up as a youth grouper. It was a big part of who I was. It wasn't merely about leadership and about social involvement. It was also very much educational, where it raised my social consciousness about what happens in the world and uncovered for me a wide Jewish knowledge and exposure I wouldn't have before. Trips to Israel, studying abroad in Israel, programs, accessing, and I don't know how much we do this with Jewish studies here at College of Charleston, but accessing higher learning when you're in high school grades, high school programs in synagogues and outside of synagogues and community-based. There's no shortage of things that people can of. And I know I speak for all of my colleagues here and those who are out there as well. We have pamphlets upon pamphlets on our desks and CDs and all kinds of things in our offices. Lots of referrals we can make for those who are interested.
As I learned while working at Camp Wisconsin years ago, any moment could be a teaching moment. So whether you're talking about camps, Israel, simply being in synagogue, anytime you can be seeped in a Jewish environment or among other Jews, it's amazing what you can get through osmosis, or as I like to put it, osmoshet.
Having been also a veteran of summer sleepaway camps, I think 15 or 20 years, and also Israel trips to Ukraine, and others. I think that there are so many options out there, as my colleagues have mentioned already, and we can definitely direct people with particular interests if they're interested. I'm happy we're all happy to do that.
Okay, I'm going to conclude a few announcements. There are some wonderful collars in the back. Students' Day collars, the collar for hunger. All the profits go to feed hungry people. So anyone who would like a collar, even a chocolate chip collar, although that sounds a little bit like cornbread. But anyone who wants a collar, please purchase one. I'd like to thank the Charleston Jewish community, the community as well, for sort of being such good supporters of the program I've had. It's a testimony to all of you that this is happening. for 18 years, twice a year. I'd like to thank the three rabbis for being wonderful spokespersons for the Jewish community. And finally, I'd like to thank Charlotte, Lake Stanley, Fern, and her sisters for sort of creating the Charlotte and Stanley Parish Endowment for Jewish Studies. Please join us for the Jewish reception afterwards, and there should be some food.